Widesight TV.
So my name's Lissa Batey. I'm Head of Marine Conservation. I do anything and everything related to the marine environment, and that includes our offshore renewables work. I have two members of staff who work solely on offshore wind, and we recognise that at the moment we're facing twin crises. Nature is in decline, and we need to tackle climate change. And we can't do one without the other. They are linked. It means that we need to take action to put nature into recovery, but we also need to take ownership of our own carbon emissions. As a country and a nation, we need to reduce those emissions, and we need to move towards more innovative technology, low carbon, renewable energy sources in order to be more sustainable into the future. We also need to make sure that the technology we are deploying is the right technology in the right place.
So who are the key stakeholders that are involved in that?
So we work with government departments, we work with decision makers right up to a ministerial level. We also work with nature conservation advisors, but we work with industry, with individual developers, with aggregate sector, with fishermen, and with members of the public. So right from a bottom-up approach. And one thing that makes wildlife trusts different is that we are a grassroots organisation. Wherever you are in the country, there is a wildlife trust for you. And it means we nationally are the voice of that movement. It means that you can get involved in activities on the ground, on your local beach, at your local coast, at your nature reserve. But it means that where we are trying to push for differences to happen in either our planning processes or decision making, or to make sure that that technology is put in the right place, then we have a voice nationally on behalf of the whole movement.
So in those two questions, you've painted a very rich picture of twin crises and conflict. Tell me, can offshore wind coexist harmoniously with, first of all, marine wildlife and secondly, other offshore industries?
I think the question isn't necessarily about whether or not they can coexist. It's about asking ourselves what we want to see from our marine environment in 2030, 2050. So we need to fast forward and we need to say, what do we want our marine environment to look like? How do we want to use it? What do we want to see there? What do we want to prioritise? Because at the moment, it's very much a race to the finish line. And those who get in first get the sea space for their activity, whether that be offshore wind, whether that be aggregates, whether that be fishing, whether that be nature conservation. And at the moment, it's conflicting and competing interests. A really interesting example was carried out in Belgium, where they went to map and carry out marine spatial planning. So they went to look at all their interests and prioritise sea use. When they tried to allocate everybody space for what they wanted and what they felt they required, the sums didn't add up. They needed 3 times the amount of sea space in order to accommodate everybody. So there has to be compromise along the way. And I suspect, although we've never done that for UK seas, that we would see a similar overlap and competing of interests. So we need to prioritise, and we then need to be more strategically, spatially specific in the allocation of that space. There isn't enough space at the moment, bottom line, and we don't want to be in a position where Blue Planet in 5-10 years' time is reissued and captures everybody on a Sunday evening, and actually it's saying, well, we've tackled the climate crisis because we've moved entirely to renewable energy, but the wildlife's gone. The sea is devoid of life. The dolphins are no more. The seabed is destroyed. So we want to make sure that we're prioritising nature alongside climate in our future.
How can we do that?
It's a challenge. It is the most complicated challenge of my lifetime and of those careers of decision makers that I speak to on a regular basis. This isn't something that one industry, one sector is going to solve on its own. it isn't something that one government department is going to be able to solve. It's going to take cross-departmental support in order to tackle this problem. So it's not going to be a quick fix, but we are here and we are willing to work with all those involved in order to make sure that we get the right outcome.
You mentioned the study that was done in Belgium, and it sounds like that's the kind of thing that can really help to kind of crystallise some of the issues and help to take decisions forward. Do you think that there's a lack of information and lack of knowledge that we have of our own kind of regional area?
I don't think it's a lack of information. There are gaps. There will always be gaps. It's incredibly expensive to go out and survey and to keep that surveying going so that it's not just a snapshot in time. It's not just this is what the seabed looked like on this day, on this year. However, we need to make the best use of the information we have got. There are gaps we do need to plug, but it would still be possible with the information that is already there, with the mapping that is available to us, to start doing some of that preliminary work. And that's the push that we're calling for as the Wildlife Trust, for some of that to actually start happening, for people to start putting lines on a map and start having the difficult conversations that are undoubtedly going to follow.
So, bottom line, and what do we need to do differently?
We need to stop trying to keep everybody happy. We need to stop going on to the next thing and the next thing. And at the moment, as I mentioned earlier, the race to the finish line, the system that we've got in place means that it's a competitive process with the offshore wind industry. And those funding rounds mean that you are always competing against others, and it means other sectors are getting pushed out. And it means that we're not taking that step back, that strategic look, that kind of, hold on a second, let's just look at our sea space and think about what we want it to look like. Because the trajectory we're on, if we're not careful, we'll destroy it without realizing it, because it will be incremental. It will be, oh, that one's okay and that one's okay, and then suddenly cumulatively everything will build up and we'll get to a point where we've gone past that tipping point. We always talk about tipping points in terms of climate change and the 1.5 degrees warming. We're at risk of a tipping point as well with the way we manage our seas, and we've got to ensure that we don't inadvertently trip over that in the rush to try and get things off the table that are currently sitting there.
So, you spoke about 2050 before. Let me just bring you right back to now and just say, in 1 year's time, if you could have any change that had been made in 1 year's time, what would you choose?
I think I would actually put a pause on some of the. We've got residual projects that are in the pipeline from previous rounds, but some of those are facing insurmountable issues, and it's in terms of how we mitigate and how we compensate. And I think we need to address those conversations, those questions, before we rush to the next round, because otherwise, as I said, that's where we'll inadvertently trip ourselves up, because we'll be on to the next thing before we've really understood the problems that are facing us here and now. And those conversations are happening, but we need to make sure that we get there before we go on to the next thing.
And finally, what's your ambition for COP? What does it need to achieve for you?
For us, we need absolutely to address the fact that we need to reduce our emissions. We need to recognise the climate and nature crises, and we need to put nature back into recovery, while also ensuring that our carbon reductions are significantly reduced. Nature has a part to play in that, but realistically, it's quite a small part. Nature can help, and that's our message, that we need nature to be in recovery to help absorb the carbon from the atmosphere. If nature's declining, then in a worst case scenario, it's actually emitting as well. So it's adding to the crises. So we have to tackle them side by side. We can't do one without the other.
energy. Energy. Marine. Energy. Power. Widesight TV.